I began by asking him if Dominic Cummings was correct that tens of thousands of lives could have been saved if the Prime Minister hadn't refused to lock down in September.
We could have reduced the deaths in the autumn wave by a significant margin, yes, if we'd have taken action. It wasn't just a matter of a 2-week circuit breaker. That wouldn't have been sufficient. And that's not what we said in what Sage was arguing for in September. It was a package of measures that had to be pretty stringent to be put in place to keep R at about 1 rather than allow it to drift up, but also a circuit breaker to bring the incidence down. There were for 2 different reasons. So circuit breaker, bring the incidence down, and then a package of measures there for the long term over the winter to keep the incidence low. And that's what we were sort of arguing for. And it's a shame we didn't do that.
And just to be clear, he's not engaging in exaggeration when he puts the figure of saved lives at tens of thousands.
Well, it depends what measures you put in place, what would be the alternative. But it certainly, you know, if you did a significant package and you put it in place in September, then we would have averted many of the problems that we then subsequently had over the autumn wave. And that autumn wave, of course, fueled the next wave because we allowed another variant to escape and start to spread. So it's hard to say exactly how many cases and deaths would have been avoided, but it's a very large number, yeah.
And just to be clear about this, his view, Cummings' view, is that we would have been in a much better position as well to deal with the Kent variant if it had turned up at the same sort of time, if we'd bared down much tougher before that.
Yeah, and he's probably right.
Yeah, so there's a sort of double advantage from that point of view.
Yeah, yes. You know, the terrible thing when the Kent variant came was that we were already at a point when the hospitals were already full from the autumn wave. So we were then facing this nightmare scenario. I think I said to you at the time, I thought it was the worst moment of the epidemic because we were facing this nightmare scenario of hospitals already full and then this new highly transmissible variant spreading on top of that. So, yeah, we would have been in a better position to cope with it, but it would have still been very tough with the Kent variant, there's no question.
Now, Cummings said that you played an important role, especially in a meeting on the 20th September, which was a Sunday, and it was a meeting with the Prime Minister, with Cummings, with Sir Patrick Vallance. Also there were Carl Hennigan, Sunetra Gupta, Anders Tegnell. Do you remember what you said at that meeting?
Yes, but obviously it wasn't sufficient.
So take us through what you argued.
I tried to explain the whole the effect of a circuit breaker, just in like a few moments, just to explain the impact that it could have. And I also tried to explain that we should act early if we think this is going to happen. You get a much better impact if you act early. And I also tried to say, look, you're going to have to do this anyway, and so it's much better to do it early rather than wait and be forced into doing it later.
And what did the Prime Minister say in response?
He was in listening mode, really. So, which was fair enough. He had a dreadful decision to have to make. So I don't remember him saying much in response. Really, he was there listening to different views.
Were you surprised that he didn't do what you and Cummings were urging?
Disappointed. Surprised that really very little happened. I mean, I can't remember exactly what was announced then, but there was something announced, but it was very small, kind of very small measures, and that's not what was necessary. And we tried to explain, in that sort of document by Sage on the sort of 21st, that you did need to take quite significant measures, a package of measures, and put them in place over the long term. Have a strategy over the long term where you try and put these measures in place for a significant period of time. I thought we'd made a convincing scientific case, at least.
We've had Robert Jenrick on the programme defending the government. I mean, his main plank of defence is that the Prime Minister always followed the advice of scientists. I don't think you are saying that.
That following the science phrase that they trotted out quite a lot, particularly, I guess, in the early time, I don't think that was accurate, and I don't think it was very fair, because they can't. We can give scientific advice, but someone else is giving advice on other aspects like the economy and so on, and they need to take these things together and make a decision.
Now, the other thing that Cummings, well, he said lots and lots of things, but one other very striking thing he said was that back in February and March, he admitted he got it wrong. He didn't press the panic button early enough. He said officials got it wrong. And he said, frankly, people like you on Sage got it wrong.
Yeah, I think he's right. Obviously it's much easier in hindsight to look back, but I think he's right. I think the strategy at that time was wrong. I was pleased when it changed. I did catch a little bit of what he said today, and not very much, but I did catch a little bit at the beginning when he was talking about that. And I felt my overwhelming feeling at the time was one of sadness, really. Partly because, remembering just how many people died, but also just, many of us had serious misgivings about the way that it was going, but it wasn't our role to set the strategy. That is the government's role. And I didn't realise until this morning that if we'd have sort of, we could have been pushing an open door if we'd have come up with more radical alternatives to the strategy. But in say end of February and early March, when it seems he had his sort of change of mind or realization, it really made me quite sad, actually.
And unfortunately, we're almost out of time. Do you think the government has learned the important lessons? I mean, there are many, for example, who say the Prime Minister should have put India on the red list and kept the Indian variant out in a more effective way. So they would say he hasn't yet learned the lessons.
I think the simple lesson is you always, with these sorts of things, when the exponential growth of an epidemic, you have to act harder than you think is necessary, wider than you think is necessary, and earlier than you think is necessary. And I think that some of those lessons, I think I look at some of the government's actions since December, since the second lockdown, and I think they have acted pretty quick, but not always. So perhaps, putting India on the red list a bit late, and then also there's a bit of a delay between announcing that and actually implementing it. Perhaps not the best, perhaps not following that kind of general mantra. Now,
last question. Advise the Prime Minister tonight. Should he unlock fully on June the 21st?
No, I think that would be, at the moment anyway, it looks a little bit risky, of course. The Indian variant is taking off in a number of places, not everywhere, but a number of places. Luckily, we've still got low levels, but it is concerning. So I think, and we are still not back to normal. As I think I've mentioned before, we measure people's contact patterns, and we're still at less than half of our normal contact patterns at the moment. And so I think that is helping to keep the lid on it to some extent. And so I think that switching to trying to, there's a difference between sort of just easing restrictions and then encouraging people to go back to normality. I think encouraging people to go back to normality would be very, very rash at the moment. So I hope that doesn't happen for a little while at least.
John, as always, great to see you. Thank you very much.